with Linwood Springs Research Station, just south of Stevens Point. Band Saw-whet Owls. It's a wonderful opportunity if you ever get a chance to go there in the fall. If you haven't gone with us before, it's lots of fun. And Jean's got lots of information for us tonight, so welcome.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to thank Audubon Board for inviting me to come speak tonight. It's always a pleasure to talk with local members. And I wanted to thank everyone for coming out tonight on a pretty nippy night after the deep snow we plowed out from yesterday. But hopefully the weather will get, I think we're about at the peak of the winter, and it's downhill from there. First, I'll give you a little history about myself. I was involved in raptors at a very young age. I was about 15 years old, and I was helping a biologist in the Green Bay area, which I'm originally from, band raptors in the Green Bay area. And then I moved to Stevens Point to attend the university, and ended up getting a job working as a lab technician for, which was at that time Consolidated Papers. Now it's gone through 3 or 4 hands. I don't know recall the name of the place that owns paper mill now, but our paper mill was the whiting mill, the Consolidated Whiting Mill, and that ended up getting closed down anyways. So, but I worked there for quite a few years, and then I left the paper mill to pursue my passion, which is to work with raptors full time. During all those years I was working, I was continuing to do some of my research and even teach some of the classes I was at the same time. So that allowed me to pursue this full time, and it's been very enjoyable. Let's see. So a little bit, and then once I retired from or left the paper mill, I was able to pursue all my interests, and that's when I formed Raptor Services. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Raptor Services. We're involved in 3 general areas pertaining to raptors: research, consulting, and education. Those are the 3 areas that we focused on. And with the research, we've been working on.
You want me to hit these lights or go to
Oh yeah, why don't you turn the lights down?
all the way?
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, let's see what I can figure out here. Like I said, it's, yeah, is that enough?
A little too much. There.
Leave it, man.
Yeah,
Is that too much? Light?
Okay. Some of the projects we're involved with. In the research category, we've been involved with studies on red-shouldered hawk, the sharp-shinned hawk, and more recently the Merlin. These are all nesting ecology studies. That's what we conduct during the summer months. Then in the fall, we move on to our migration work on the Northern Saw-whet Owl. And we conduct a lot of banding operations during the fall months of October. And we're currently in the process of publishing a paper on the Saw-whet Owl's molt pattern in aging birds using molt. More recently, we've picked up on a couple winter species, golden eagles and snowy owls. The golden eagle project, there was one spotted a couple years ago in the wintering months near Waupaca, and the National Eagle Center in Wabasha, Minnesota was conducting a telemetry study trying to learn and understand where are these golden eagles coming from and where are they going back to breed. Very little was known about the breeding ecology of the golden eagles that come visit Wisconsin. So their goal was to attach solar-powered GPS transmitters, and they can get readings every hour on the bird, and then it's transmitted up to a satellite and then back down to the computers, and we can see where they now on the snowy owl, only this information is transferred through cell phone towers, but, and it can store up to 100,000 locations of the owl, but it has to come in encounter with a cell phone tower at some time to dump all those locations. So when it's out of connection with a cell phone system, then it saves it until it does get into range. So it's a little, but it's much cheaper, much less expensive to do the cell phone transmitters than the satellite. So we're experimenting with, we're working on both of those. Moving on to the consulting part of what we do with Raptor Services. What I do is, for different agencies, sometimes it can be the DNR, sometimes it's a utility company, or anyone whose needs is requiring to have surveys done regarding threatened and endangered birds. So these utility companies, it's frequently, they have to have permits are required that they conduct surveys for threatened and endangered species. So these are a few of them that we have in Wisconsin that are on either threatened or endangered. The peregrine falcon, the red-shouldered hawk, the piping plover, the logger-headed shrike, and bald eagle. Even though the bald eagle isn't on the threatened or endangered species list, it's still under the Eagle Act, and so that requires, they're very sensitive to habitat changes, and so those are the species that usually get work to conduct surveys. Oftentimes it's utility companies that are expanding the width of the right-of-way, so if they need to upgrade the transmission line, they usually have to cut a little bit more into the woods, and they need the permits for that. And then the DNR has biologists such as myself or agency or consulting firms go in and do surveys, and that's basically, and then part of that, we're required to, we don't just do surveys when the habitat isn't proper for the birds. So it takes, a lot of the time I spend prepping for the project is to evaluate using aerial maps. I can get offline very detailed maps so I can determine if this habitat is even suitable, if the species are going to be there. So I spend a lot of time on the computer looking at these maps and determining if the birds might be there. And then after we conduct the survey, if nests are found or if birds are detected, then a whole nother project is started. We have to usually try and find the nest to determine if this disturbance that they're going to be doing, cutting trees or digging or trenching, is going to interfere with the nesting cycle of that species. So that's, and then after that's all the field work's done, then I got to write up a report. All our methods and what we detected and all kinds of information. And then if there's any of those species detected, then the DNR will make up their decision of what will happen. Whether the utility company can either not work in that area during certain months of the year, and then during the winter they could go in when the birds per se maybe aren't nesting, and they could go in and maybe cut or do what they have to. Sometimes there's certain accommodations, or they might reroute what they're planning on. Sometimes they want me to check several lines to see which one has the least amount of species that they're disturbing, and then so they'll route it that way. But all those calls are up to the DNR to do that. This was a pipeline a few years back. Enbridge put a pipeline through from the Duluth area, cutting south through central Wisconsin, and then through to just east of Madison, I believe it was. And so this utility companies oftentimes will share a right-of-way, and there is an existing pipeline under where most of the snow trail, you can see the trail there, that's where the existing pipeline is. And then this new one is going to go off to the left, and then it runs in parallel with the transmission line as well. So they do the best they can to minimize any habitat disturbance. this is how it was when it was finished product. The third area we focus on is education. And the first class I started organizing was a 5-day Raptor workshop. And this was designed to give students or participants, oftentimes it's college students, but it wasn't always, sometimes they're retired people, sometimes they're just people interested in birds and they wanted to be a little more involved with them. So what the class entails is working right with the birds, learning how to extract them from the nets, how to safely band them, take measurements, draw blood. Sometimes we have to access the nest because it's up in a tree, so then that requires climbing. I have a morning or afternoon class where I teach them how to climb with the spikes and ropes. And then also, like you can see the girl up there, she was successful. We climb up about 20 feet in the tree and then she waves for the camera. And then we also do some rappelling to rappel down from the nest. A few other things we do in the workshop is the students get a chance to practice drawing blood on the birds, because oftentimes we draw blood to test for certain chemical contaminants in the bird. It's useful in determining sexes of the birds and paternity, because we're finding in a lot of birds that just because the two birds that are paired up are not necessarily the parents of those chicks in the nest. So extra pair populations are common in many birds. And so that was pretty surprising when they first came up with this several years ago. Now a lot of people are familiar with it. So all kinds of studies that can be learned from just a drop of blood. Let's see what else do we cover. So the summer workshops, we have 3 times of the workshops to run. I have one this spring. I think it's the last day of March and then the first 4 days of April. And that deals with learning how to find nests, what clue you into where a nest might be. And then the June session is geared more towards the nesting birds, where we're actually banding the chicks, banding the adults. We catch the adults using one of the owls. We got an owl here tonight I'm going to show you. Sassy is her name. She's a great horned owl, and she's the bully of the crowd. All the other birds in the community don't care for her because they feel threatened that she's going to potentially attack them, or more likely their chicks. So when a great horned owl's around, then these other nesting birds will swoop at them, and then we use Sassy as a lure bird placed by the mist net, and the kestrel or the Merlin or the sharpshin will swoop at the owl, and then they hit the net that we have suspended. So I got a picture of that coming up later. But those are some of the techniques. It's geared to get the students involved in the class right away, not to sit and watch me measure and me take the birds out, although we go through some training of that. But I try and get them, because it isn't that hard to follow. It's just you need the time to do it is where you really learn. And so I try and get their hands on it as soon as possible. And we limit the class to only 8 students. So that's ideal for the students to get their most hands-on experience they can. Now, this class has been very popular. It's a 1-credit class accredited through UW-Stevens Point, but you're not required to take it for credit. That's not a requirement, but you can, as many of the students do use it as part of their classes. We've had students from all the green shaded in states and provinces of Canada. I haven't updated this lately. We have several from Mexico have come, and about 3 or 4 other states Virginia and Colorado, and some of the other states aren't colored in yet. But and we did have one guy fly all the way from Australia for the class. And since he was coming, and we had to go through a lot of work to get him to pass through, to get his visa and into the United States, but it all passed, and I had to write some letters inviting him into the country for this class, otherwise he wouldn't have gotten in. He was a PhD student in Australia, and he came for 2 weeks. Class was only 1 week, but I told him since he's coming so far, he can spend another week with us, continuing on with saw-whet banding. And so he went back, that was 2 years ago I think, he went back, got his PhD, and now he's teaching in his home country in Malaysia.
Oh.
So he sends me a Christmas card every year. So you really do get a chance to meet. I really like doing these because you meet all kinds of different people in different parts of the country, and many of them have done some research for other, as a volunteer or an intern at other research stations. So I'm always interested in hearing how they do it over there, and maybe I can learn something as well. In the fall, we give about 30 saw-whet owl banding programs each night in October. So about 30 nights we do it. And so about 500 visitors go through our banding station each fall. Sometimes it's Girl Scouts and Boy Scout clubs, troops. Sometimes it's university. Madison comes out, 2 classes come out every year for owl banding. They've been doing that for 20 years. We get a whole variety. Sometimes it's bird club, sometimes it's garden club, and we get Illinois bird banding, or Illinois Audubon comes up every year now for, I'd say, 15 years or so. So they come up. So we get, like, a lot of students and people, the general public, get a chance to experience the saw-whet banding project. And we also do a 1-day hawk migration, where we have a couple hours before we go out in the field, preview and training on how to identify raptors during migration. I have some slides, and we talk about that in aging and sexing them. And then we go out to a banding station. Either here, there's one in Stevens Point I operate, or one in Green Bay. And then we go out there to sharpen up our skills on identification, as well as trap some of the birds during migration. And we had a red-tailed hawk in the lower left under a net. The blue sky, you can see there's little specks up there. There's probably about 50 specks. That's a kettle of broadwings. And then there's a sharpshin in the upper right-hand corner, and a merlin down in the lower right-hand corner. So that's a busy day. It's very spectacular because you're in these little blinds and you're watching the migration, and then when the birds come in to swoop at our lures, they get caught in our nets, and it's really spectacular and interesting to watch their whole hunting tactics. And so that's usually a 1-day thing. And then last year we had our first bald eagle banding workshop. So 1 day we have attracted a bald eagle that was coming to a bait pile, a dead deer or a deer carcass, and we had some nets set up there. And most of the students who volunteered or who took the class were from UW Stevens Point. A couple were from Madison, and so they all participated in the trapping and banding and measuring. You needed a couple people to someone to hold onto the bird and someone to hold its wing, because they're very big and powerful, but it was a good time. These are just some more group shots of every class we usually have a group picture. And over the years I put together these few. So now I'll give you a little results about the research that we've learned over at these years of doing this work. The red-shouldered hawk, we've been working on that for over 40 years now. That's a joint effort with myself and my brother. My brother lives in Green Bay, so he He does surveys in certain parts of Nicolet National Forest, and I have a study area here in central Wisconsin. So, and then let's see, Merlins. I'm going to talk about the Merlins, the golden eagle, and the snowy owl. Now, this is a map of from the Breeding Bird Atlas, indicating where the red-shouldered hawk was found to be either confirmed or probable breeder. Each one of those little blocks indicates that it was found in that spot in that county. And to give you you're not familiar with how the Breeding Bird Atlas works, they have those little square blocks covering the whole state. And then all the white parts means they did not find the red-shouldered hawk, or whatever map I show. So you can see the red-shoulder is pretty well distributed throughout the state. Pretty good concentration you can kind of see in the central part. There are a couple of specific habitat needs they have are, they like mature stands of forest and large blocks of forest. They don't want just a little 30-acre woodlot surrounded by corn and hay fields. That's red-tail habitat. So a lot of the southern half of the state is more suitable for red-tails. But along river bottom floodplains along the Wisconsin and the Mississippi and any other tributaries where there's lots of frog habitat, that's more suitable for red-shouldered hawks. I'm going to compare it, I think I go to the next one, yeah. I'm going to compare it to how the other hawks are. The red-tailed hawks up here in the upper left-hand corner, and you can see kind of just what I said about that red-tailed hawk habitats in the southern half of the state, real heavy. He still has a good stronghold throughout the whole state, but really heavy Madison, Milwaukee, to that area. And they like more open country. Move over to the right, the Cooper's hawk, upper right-hand corner. And these maps were done during the Breeding Bird Atlas from 1995 through 2000. So they're pretty current, but I almost think the Cooper's hawk has increased yet even more. And I think if they did another one, there would be more blocks filled in for the Cooper's hawk than what's shown there. But for most parts, that's pretty accurate, I think. The broadwing hawk, you can see he's primarily in the northern part of the state. It almost looks like wherever you took the broadwing and you overlapped it on the red tail, he'd fill in the state salad. And then the red-shouldered hawk down there you can see. And that's part of the reason why I think they listed the red-shouldered hawk as a threatened species. It isn't a very common species. When you look at the whole state, many counties don't even have red-shouldered hawks detected on the Breeding Bird Atlas. But the center part of the state is kind of, the red-shouldered hawk is more of a southern hawk, so it's found very commonly in Florida, Georgia, and many of those states down to the south, Arkansas. But in Wisconsin, we don't have good blocks of wooded floodplain forest in the southern half of the state. So that's probably the reason why there isn't many down in the southern part. And we get up to the northern part where there's larger tracts of forest, or in the central, where we are, there's consistently enough red-shouldered hawk habitat around with regard to forest component. And then we also have river bottom floodplain forest through the Wisconsin river system, or the Mississippi, Wisconsin River. So, once we get north of that, then the red-shouldered hawk is getting out on the edge of its range and is not very common in the northern half. Not because of the forest component, but it's just because it's too far north for it, it's out of its range. Although there's still some up there, but in reduced numbers. Now in our study on the red-shouldered hawk, I had my study area in central Wisconsin, that pink color, and my brother broke his study area down into two sections. The northern part, which is a lighter shade of blue, and then the southern part, the dark blue. And the reason he did that was because he noticed the birds in the northern part of Nicolay, most of those nests were failing. The red-shouldered hawk nests were failing. So he divided it into those two blocks, and when he did the analysis on the birds from the northern part, less than one bird, about 0.7 chicks, were produced per nest attempt from a 10-year average of these three study areas. So the northern part had very low reproduction. It was about half of what the other two study areas found. His southern area and my central Wisconsin area both had about 1.3 to 1.4 chicks per nest attempt. And that counts failures in that calculation, so it sounds pretty low, but once you have a failure thrown in there or two, and you put that in with the sample size, then that reduces the total number of chicks down to usually 1.1 to 1.4 level for us, and then they're really low here. So that was kind of interesting. And we were kind of, we're not, we don't have any hardcore data to say really why that is, but it's common for species near the outer edge of their range to have lower reproduction. That's been studied well, not specifically in red shoulders, but in birds in general. So that does not surprise me. That far north, the densities of the red shoulders are greatly reduced. We don't find many. He has to travel 20, 30 miles between nests, sometimes 40 miles in the northern part, and in the southern part, the birds are nesting much closer. But the good news is that in the last, let's say, 10 to 20 years, we've noticed red-shouldered hawks moving into urbanized areas. I guess it's good for the red-shoulder. Some of the people aren't always the happiest because it's eating these, and it's a little better than the Cooper's hawk because the red-shoulder usually eats chipmunks, and so then they're happy that he's eating chipmunks. There are a lot of chipmunks around. But if he was feeding on birds like the Cooper's hawk, eating their robin and stuff, well then a lot of the people in town don't really care for that. They'd rather they didn't pick on their birds. He came and got my Orioles yesterday. But they're just doing their thing. That's what they're supposed to do. That's what they get paid for. But you can see where that bigger arrow is. That's right there is the nest. Darker clump. The red shoulders built a nest way up there, and it's right under this house. And the people knew it was up there, but for the most part, it was pretty secretive. They would see it come and go, but you really couldn't. I looked with the binoculars. There's so much cover up there, I couldn't even see its tail sticking out. But you could tell there were chicks in the nest because there was white splatter all over the bottom of the tree on their driveway. So that's the telltale sign that there's chicks in the nest when there's splatter all over the ground. So that's good. When we found, so this was in Wisconsin Rapids, and there was a little stream running through in the back, not in their backyard, but just a house or two away. And I'm finding some in Stevens Point, the Clover area. On Heffron Street, we've had a pair there for many years. And one thing we found with the red shoulders, and with the sharp-shinned hawks, and I think, I haven't studied the Cooper's hawk, but I think Rosenfield has found this as well. The males tend to stay on the territory or return if they migrate. Red shoulders are mostly migratory, so they do usually if the male comes back the same spot. But it isn't always the same life. Sometimes, and I don't really have a good measure how frequently, but it's fairly often, at least with the red shoulders, that he gets a different gal each year. Or sometimes we've had him come back, the female comes back after she was vacant for a year or two. So, but in the smaller hawks, like the sharp-shinned hawk, we found that activity is much more, they're much less faithful. When we catch, or when we get the male, I would say, I think it was 90% of the time that that site is going again, it's the same male. He comes back almost every year. But only about 30% of the time, it's the same female. So when we see, oh, they're back, well, maybe he's back, but a good chance she's not back, it's a different female. So, moving on to the Merlin, he's also taken up on this activity of moving into town. For many years, the Merlin was hit very hard by the DDT, just like the peregrine and the bald eagle, and probably many other raptors, but it was the most well documented with the bald eagle and the peregrine. And they had conclusive evidence from chemical analysis on the peregrine eggs that they had very high amounts of DDE, a component of the DDT chemical. But the Merlin was small and wasn't studied very well at the time, and so its reduced numbers wasn't so easily documented. But ever since the 1980s, DDT was banned in 70 to 71. I think Wisconsin it was 70, but nationwide it was 1971 that they banned DDT. And it had a life expectancy, the chemical did, in the environment of about 10 years. So it kind of followed suit. By 1980, birds started showing up, or at least they started reproducing better, and they started making a comeback. Now the Merlin, his numbers were reduced throughout. They hardly had any nests, very few nests in the state. Most of the nesting birds in this Great Lakes region were up in the boundary waters of Minnesota. There they still had a pretty good hold, and after the ban of DDT, they've increased and increased, and they recovered to where they were through northern Wisconsin, and now we're even finding them extending their range further south than what was historically marked, was about the birds north of Wausau, was as far as the Merlins had really been established as breeders. And now, in the last few years, we've had Merlins, couple pair, 2-3 pair, nesting right in Stevens Point. So that was good news. They nest right in town. This one was in Wausau by the school. And the guy in the middle is holding one of the Merlins. That's how little they are. It's kind of hard to see what he's holding. This is one of the workshop classes. And they nest in old crow nests. They don't build, falcons don't build a nest. So they have to rely either, like kestrels will nest in the cavity or a nest box. Merlins will nest in stick structures, but sometimes on cliffs out west, and sometimes even on the ground. But in Wisconsin, we've never experienced that. They most commonly use white pine trees, and the nests were built by crows, ravens, or other hawks. Red shoulder or Cooper's hawk are potential nests for them to use. There are always nests that were built by those birds in previous years. They would not try and nest where the red shoulders nested, or he'd become food. But so a lot of these nests in these city parks, they're the Merlins nesting way up high, and you can't even see the nest in the tree. That's the biggest problem in finding, because the crows like to build the nests up there where they got a lot of cover as well. And so that's where the Merlins go. And so when we find a pair of Merlins, and this is what I thought I'd let you guys hear what a Merlin sounds like, because if you do hear any Merlins in this central Wisconsin area, if you hear this, they're probably a pair establishing there. And so listen, this is their call. So that's how we locate them. We oftentimes, especially during pre-incubation, when the male's finding these old crow nests and he's calling and flying around, and the female comes over, then he starts doing some courtship dives, and they're both chattering back and forth. They're very vocal, and sometimes to people they can be a nuisance too. So they kind of notice them. People mostly notice them. I've heard that, they tell me when I stop, when I'm walking through and I'm playing the call. he started throwing rotten tomatoes at me. Get out of here! No, but I did talk to one guy, and he said, "Boy, he was here last year, and he says it was driving me crazy. I was out on my deck grilling my hamburgers, and all I heard was that racket." But he was fine with it. He was trying to accommodate me and help me find the nest. But, so they nest very high. Most of these nests I was visited were way high up in a tree. This one was 76, 77 feet.
Oh my God.
What we usually do if we can't see the nest and we see these great big trees, then we know they're nesting in one of those great big trees. So and they're kind of used to people, and they're nesting so high up that they kind of think that you aren't watching. So we'll just kind of camp out and wait for Dad to come flying in with a house sparrow, and he flies around calling, "I got food for you, come and get it." And she comes whipping off the nest, and then if you see where she came from, but even if you didn't, you can always see where she goes to after she gets done eating. So you just got to sit there for 15 minutes while she's on a branch plucking all these feathers off, and they're flying, and then he sits around for a little while, and then sometimes she'll scold and get back to work. And then so he takes off usually, and once she's done, then she'll fly to the nest, and then we can find where the nest is that way. But sometimes you gotta wait a couple hours for them to come back with food. The male, when she has chicks, he comes frequently because he's got a whole family to feed. Sometimes there's 5 or 6 chicks in the nest, and his wife he's got to feed. So he's got to catch a lot of these house finches and house sparrows and whatever he can catch. It's primarily birds, some insects like dragonflies, but mostly birds. We've had a pair nesting in a cemetery this year over at the Garden Angel Cemetery. And I had a call from I had a report of one in that vicinity, but we didn't find a nest, and we didn't know where they were. And then I had a call from, I think it was the tree trimmer. He was in there, he's going to cut the tree down, and he was trimming the branches off the bottom, and the Merlins were going crazy. So then he realized, he looked up and could see the nest up there. He saw there were 3 chicks in the nest. So we came back a few days later with, down at the bottom of the screen, you can see is our Sassy, the great horned owl. And she's sitting here, and then we have the nest net here. I'm extracting the adult male out of the net. So once he saw the owl, he started screaming bloody murder like the caller was. And then he's just making dive bomb passes and clink, right in the net. So, and with them, we usually only have to go just stand on the side and watch. And we got them. It's real simple.
And what happened to the chicks?
When we got there, which was about, I think it was about 4 days later, there was only 1 chick in the nest. And I don't know, there was no evidence, there weren't any dead chicks in the nest, there wasn't any feathers from chicks in the nest. If I had to kind of guess, based on the evidence, limited evidence I had, since there wasn't, I don't think a cat or a raccoon got up there, because I think there would have been more mess up there. I think either a Cooper's hawk came in and grabbed them, or a great horned owl, but in town there's not that many great horned owls, I don't think, around there. Over in Iverson, and it could have been a great horn, or it could have been crows.
But you caught the male Merlin in mist net. How did you check the nest for the chick?
I climbed up there.
You did.
Yeah. And then we've been doing, if I have help with me, which I usually do, then I'll lower the chicks down, and then they'll do the processing, the banding, and the measurements. But it gets tiring standing up and hanging in that tree while they're doing all this stuff, and then you want to take pictures, and let me hold it, and you see them. I'm hollering, hurry up! I'm getting hungry. So these are the 2 adults. The males on the left, females on the right. Females are bigger. and then the one chick that was in there. So I don't know, I don't have any, but we went back about a week later. Lorraine, my wife, and I went back there, and the Merlins were still mad at me. We looked around, I didn't see anything, and I wondered if something happened to the last chicken and the parents had abandoned or what. So I did a barred owl hoot, and that's all it took. In she came. She was sitting in the tree, I don't know, on the other side of the cemetery, and she heard that barred owl, and she came screaming over at me, swooping, and hit the run for the car. So that's what the chicks look like up at the, way up in that nest. You feel like you're getting an aerial view when you're up there looking around. But yeah, so you can see the sticks are real big sticks. Crows built it. They are their fur, their white fuzz or white feathers, their down feathers, have a little gray tint to them. In contrast to the kestrels are pure white. And I was kind of impressed with how it felt kind of smoky color. It was a little different than what, and I know the larger falcons tend to be more smoky colored. Now these are the locations I was talking about. Now this paper that we're currently, was accepted for printing in Raptor Research. It's a joint effort on our part here with Raptor Services, Dr. Rosenfield from the university, and 2 of his students. So the 4 of us are authors on this paper. And the red dots are all the nests, and actually there's more. I had about 4, but it was in the same area. Merlin nests in Wausau. We had one over by Dubay, and then 3 pairs in Stevens Point for a couple of years. Other reports down here, we had some nests. So these red ones are the areas where the Merlin has extended its range this far south, and this is what is not considered their normal range. So it's an expansion of their range. We'll see how far south they really go. I don't know if they're going to continue on down or not. There's certainly habitat. You got bigger cities like Madison and just all through this area. But the black dots were from the Breeding Bird Atlas in 1995 through 2000, and that's where the Merlin's range was at that time. And now we have confirmed spots here, and we weren't really looking for the Merlins. These just kind of, people told us about them, and then once we've been informed about them, then I'll go look in those spots. But to get these initial sites, there was not an intensive search down in the southern part of the state. We just kind of came upon them. So that's good news for the Merlins, that they're expanding. Moving on to the golden eagle. This bird was coming to a carcass, and we were fortunate enough to be able to set up our trap at a spot where the eagle had been identified. And in the pictures that the guy sent us, I could see this garage in the background. And I thought, oh, that would be nice if you let us camp out, watch instead of making a little tent blind that we have and sit out there in the wind and blowing, that garage would be great. And so when we got in contact with him, he says, yeah, if you guys want a trap, that would be okay. Well, we saw that garage there, could we use that for a blind? He says, no, I don't think so. He says, you'll have to stay in the house. He had a beautiful glassed-in sunroom where we could see everything. He's on a little bit of a hillside. It's kind of rolling hills over there in that part of Waupaca. And it was so comfy of a field research warm, and we could run to the bathroom, make a sandwich. So that was really nice. Now this is the type of net, and we use this oftentimes on some of the birds we catch. In addition to mist nets, we use these bow nets. And this is a really big hoop net or bow net, and it's makes a, when it's set, it's formed in a semicircle, and then there's a radio-controlled release that we can use those radio-controlled that they use for airplanes and cars and trucks. And so we can release our bonehead with that, and it'll go up to about, the units we have go about half a mile. So it works pretty well. So once the eagle came down to the carcass, started feeding on it, they usually will feed for about an hour. So it's not an urgency that we got it quick the second it's in there. So I let it feed for a little bit, make sure it was real comfortable, and then it got something in its stomach anyways. And then I popped the spring on it, and we started tracking her, and she took off. We banded her in February, and she took off the next day. I don't know if she was a little disgruntled against Wisconsin or something. She thought she better move, and she started going, and she went up all the way up. I thought she stopped here for a few days, and I thought, oh, that's where she's going to stay. And then she'd kick it in and go for more, and she'd stop again and again. Finally, way up here, she was above, right at the Arctic Circle. And that's where she camped out all summer. And based on her concentrated locations of really not moving more than a couple hundred yards, we knew she was most likely a breeder and had a nest there. And then she came south, and when she came south the first year, she got drifted over kind of high, and then when she got to Lake Superior, she was on this side, and she quick realized, I gotta go back. So she did. But this year, I think I got a map of this year's route. She went back the next summer, so this is, we know 2 summers she was in the same spot, and she stayed there all summer. But this year she left a month earlier, 1 whole month earlier to start moving south. So that makes me, I really don't like to speculate, but something might have happened at her nest. Maybe the nest failed late, or she only had 1 chick, or something. Because for her to move a whole month earlier seems a little unusual. And because even though they nest relatively early up there, and these are big birds, they mature, their incubation period's longer, their nesting cycle's longer, and so they don't really have as much time as many of the birds do down here to complete a nesting cycle. But she came back, and then this year, she missed Lake Superior again down here, only she missed it by quite a bit, and she went all the way down, came across through upper Michigan, past Sault Ste. Marie and Escanaba, and came into Wisconsin that way. And it took her 1 whole month, 1 month, I think, from the time she started to the time she got to Wisconsin for her trip. And that's a 2,000-mile trip. And that's when she came back. And we have, I think, we got a picture. Oh yeah, she came through. This is Green Bay way down here, so this is a very large picture, and this is all Lake Michigan. So she came through this way, and you can see from the 21st and the 22nd, she was still up there. And the 23rd, so the 23rd, 23rd at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. In 2 hours, she went probably about 80 miles. And she kept going, and she went, it's 1 o'clock, then 3 o'clock, and then roost. She roosted there at night. And then she's very close to the Walpaca site at that date. But you notice she knew, I think she knew all along, once she got through here, where she was going. She followed down the bay. When she got to the end of Green Bay, she realized, oh, time to turn. And I think it was some geographic things like the bay and the city of Green Bay. She knew that was probably not that she knew it instinctively, but she knew it from all the times that she's been migrating and circling up very high where they get a really good view of things. And bodies of water like Lake Winnebago, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, I think they remember those pretty easily with the clues.
Gene,
Yeah.
how many golden eagles overwinter in Wisconsin? You got any idea?
I could take a guesstimate. I think they're doing counts over, and they're more common in the western part of the state, where it's more mountainous or rolling hills, some elevation to it, not flat. Not that you can't find them in Buena Vista, you can, but they're not very frequent there. I would probably hundreds, maybe 1,000.
The Cedar area is sort of a hot area.
I think I don't know that it necessarily is. I think further west,
Even
Eau Claire would be better, but like City Point, if you're just west of Rapids, where all those Saddle Mound is, all those rolling hills. I was out there in the 70s, out by Saddle Mound, right by City Point, and I saw golden eagles way back then. Nobody really knew about it, and it's pretty desolate area. There's long miles from City Point, then you go 40 miles to Black River Falls, and there isn't anything in between. But we'd see, not lots, but 3 or 4 goldens. So I don't know, the guy at the National Eagle Center became a little interested in when he started seeing some goldens, and everyone was shocked. I was surprised to hear what he was seeing as many as he is out there, but that you look at the habitat, it looks very similar from that City Point all the way over to and south, that whole quarter of the state, kind of, maybe not quite that much of the state, but that whole region, Eau Claire, La Crosse, I think there's a lot of them. But they're a little tricky to identify between, bald are still way more common than goldens in Wisconsin. And so when you see a big eagle with a dark head and a dark tail, you are probably right, it probably is a bald eagle, immature bald eagle. But everyone just said that all the time, and they didn't know what to look for, and they didn't get a good enough look, and so they just called it a bald eagle, and a lot of them were probably goldens.
You know where this bird is now?
Yeah, she's back on, I don't know if I got the next picture. Yes, there she is. There's her antenna. The transmitter has, the satellite ones has an antenna that sticks out about this long. It's a whip antenna, it's not rigid. She preens it just like a feather. She would miss it if she lost it. But it sits on her back, and it's got a solar panel on it. The next slide I have, or slides I have coming up of the snowy owl, shows what the snowy owls, it's a little different, but almost the same. And you can see, not very well, but you can see the band on her leg too, right there. This is the tab where the rivet goes through. So yeah, she's back at the exact same spot where we trapped her at. This is the same spot where we had the bonet. It took her a whole 2 years to get used to go back to that spot. She was scared for all last winter. She wouldn't go to that spot, even though there was a deer carcass there. She was around there. We saw her a couple times across the valley, but she would not come. But now she did. So now the last one, we're going to move on to the snowy. And this year has been an eruptive year for the snowies. They are being seen all over. If you look on eBird, there's snowy owl spots where they've been detected all across the state and in big numbers. And the birds that are flying down here are mostly juveniles, which is typical. There are some adults that still get this far south, but for the most part, these are juvenile birds, and they had a good year, apparently a good nesting season for the snowy owls. Lemming population was probably high. So then they produced many chicks, 4, 5, 6, 7, instead of the 1, 2, or 3 that they might on other years. And so then there's, with that many chicks around that have all hatched, they have to have some place to go, so they're moving south, and that's why we see a lot of them. Some eruptive species, it isn't always that way. Sometimes it's the birds up there are short of food. it doesn't appear that these birds are short of food because they're healthy and they have fat on them, the birds we've caught so far. So it looks like it's more of a bonus reproduction year. So a lot of them are coming down. There's her transmitter. That's the big black part of it is the solar panel. These don't weigh less than 3% of the bird's weight, so it isn't very heavy for her. It's pretty easy, and that's we're restricted by our bird banding rules that we can't put anything on bigger than 3% of the weight, so it's got to be less than that. And this was about 2% of the weight, but of his weight. This is a male. The juvenile males have a fair amount of barring, and they tend to look a little more like an adult female, but since this bird is not currently in any molt, that's how we knew it was a male. And from size too, we took measurements, weight, wing chord, and that tells us what sex it is. Females in raptors are larger than the males.
How do you attach these?
There's Teflon, they call it Teflon tubing, but it feels like ski jacket material. Nylon is what it feels like. It doesn't stretch much. It's pretty, but it's very flexible, and it's a tube of it. It's flattened out, but it's 2 layers to it. You know, it isn't just like a single ribbon. It's a tube, circular, but it's flattened, and that ribbon will last many, many years, and it comes around over their breastbone and then comes back around under their wings and attaches the 2 ends of the transmitter.
Just like a backpack.
Yep, that's what they call a backpack harness. And as long as the sun hits the solar panel for enough time, it'll recharge the battery during the day, and then it'll continue and connects to the cell phone. This one's a cell phone tower unit. It'll send the coordinates to the cell phone. But if it moves out of range, then we don't get an update, and we're wondering what happened. Maybe nothing, but we don't know. Maybe she got it off, or maybe she got hit by a car and she's laying on her stomach, and then it's not getting sun, and so we will never know. But we could, there's some ways we can try and pinpoint where she was, and we can maybe go look on the roads or something. Because each of these units are $3,000.
Oh, yeah. Gina, what happens in the summertime? Because there's not too much cell phone activity way up north.
No.
Towers, so it's most of that time they're out of range, I think.
Yeah, and that's one of the drawbacks with putting this type of unit on a snowy owl, because he's not near cell phone towers that much. And so we're going to have to wait till next fall. Hopefully she'll still be alive, and then we can get, because it saves 100,000 locations in that box. So it'll keep kind of collecting the data, provided she lives long enough to come back and migrate, and that she migrates this far. Maybe next year she's more of an adult. Oh, I don't have to go so far south. I'll stay up in northern Minnesota where there's no cell phone towers. So it's a little bit of a gamble, but these are, even though they're pricey, they're still about half the price of the satellite ones. The satellite ones, the unit itself is about $4,000, but then you have to pay for the satellite connection fees. And so that pumps it up into the $5,000. Depends on how long you have the bird. And, Jeanette, our golden eagle, we've had data on her for 2 full years now. So that's great. We're learning so much. This type of technology and information, we could ban 1,000 of these snowy owls and maybe get a couple band returns, but we don't have any. They're not going to be up in the Arctic. We won't know those, but no one's going to find them up there. They come back down here in the winter, then they get hit by a car, and we find out, well, it was in Appleton, that's good, but collecting data was very slow with just band returns for them. So, and this whole, it's called Snowstorm is the name of this project, and I'm just part of a great, not great big, but several other researchers in other parts of the country we're all jointly working together on this. We're going to take 3 to 4 snowy owls in Wisconsin. We currently have this one on the Buena Vista bird. And we're looking to put on 2 or 3 more in Appleton area and somewhere in Wisconsin, trying to spread them out a little bit. And then they're doing it in Pennsylvania and in New York, and so we'll get some ideas what these birds are doing regionally, not just an individual. Yeah.
I heard they were looking for people to sponsor a unit to do more birds.
Yes, that's what I'm getting to that. But I'm not gonna. I mean, the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology has funded the first unit, the one on this bird here, the Buena Vista bird, and then there's been the organization themselves. I'm giving a field trip on Saturday to members who want to come out and see where our bird is now, and it's a kind of a fundraising field trip, $25 for the field trip, and that goes with the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology, collects all that, and then when that builds up, if they get enough donations, they'll sponsor the bird. So, yeah, so far we got 2 from WSO and 1 from the Natural Resources Foundation. So we got 3. I think there's still some spaces available if anyone is available on Saturday. Yeah.
How long have you had the receiver on this bird, and how did you capture it?
Okay. It was, I think, December 23rd, I think is when we put it on. And we went out to the Buena Vista grasslands because some birds had been seen there regularly. This was, the bird was near Town Line Roads, is where we caught it. And what we use is a bow net similar to that golden eagle. It's radio controlled. And then for a lure, we use a pigeon. So the pigeon is in a harness, but tied to the middle of the bow net. And then when the snowy owl comes in and grabs them, then we trigger the bow net. Sometimes the pigeon is fine, but sometimes not. Yeah.
That even though somebody has sponsored the transmitter itself, that you donate all your gas and all the money for the equipment you use and everything else comes out of your pocket?
This is true. This is true. Some of the projects, like this one, and like the Golden Eagle one, Raptor Services just went along and provided whatever I could with the traps, and I was not compensated for my gas or time or anything like that. And same with the Snowy Owl project. But that's not always true for all of my research. Usually for the research part, that is true. It all comes out of my pockets. But the consulting work, that's what I try to use to generate funds for an income. I have to have an income. So, but Janet, you're right. It would be nice to get some kind, and maybe if they don't get enough for a whole transmitter and they got a couple hundred that was donated, maybe they'll come through with that. I don't know. That's maybe someone could suggest that too. So, yeah. And here's the map of the data we have so far. Now we're having a little bit of, right now we're having a little bit of cell phone or power failure with the unit. We don't know if the feathers are covering too much over the solar panel, and then we had cloudy, and it needs that sun to generate. So we might have a lapse in coverage, or it might have moved whether it's not in cell phone coverage, and then all of a sudden it might be 2 months from now, or a month, 2 months, and when it starts to move north, all of a sudden it gets to us where a cell phone tower is, and we're going to get all this back information. We don't really know. But we're hoping that's the case. We did see the bird. It left this area and only moved about a mile north, and someone got a really close-up shot of it flying, and you could see that little white box on his back because his feathers were streamlined. When he was sitting on the bale of hay, you couldn't see it on his back because he puffed his feathers up. And so that we might have some break in the, so what they did is they reprogrammed the transmitters to not try and send every day, to do it, I think, like twice a week. Because that's when it uses up most of the energy is to try and connect to a cell phone tower, and I don't know how long it does it, but it goes through a cycle trying to connect, and then when it can't after so much time, it stops. And then that wears the battery down if it's not within range. So by cutting down that, maybe it'll build up, it'll take 3 days to build up enough power to connect. So I just wanted to thank everyone again. We do have the 2 education birds. I use these birds for the great horned owl. I use as a trapping lure for part of the year for summer season. But we also use her for education programs throughout the fall, for my workshops. Students get a chance to work with a live education bird. And snowy great horned owls can be very intimidating. And Sassy didn't get her name for nothing. There's a reason. But we'll bring out the Saw-whet first. Yeah. Yeah. So this is Crash. Feel free to walk around. Right? Yeah. She's the Wisconsin's smallest owl, and so we brought both the largest, the great horned owl, and the Saw-whet's the smallest. She's been with us for 3 years, and her name is Crash. Oh. She was a bird that was rehabbed at the Raptor Education Group in Antigo. We got her from Marge Gibson. She was hit by a car. It was a car crash. So that's how she got her name. And if you look at her pupil and her left eye, it's larger, more dilated than the right eye. And so she has impaired vision in that eye. And so that's why she was classified as non-releasable. We can only, our permit will only allow us to keep non-releasable birds. So if they were healthy to be released, then that's what they'll be released. We don't get involved in any of the rehabbing. Raptor Services is just those 3 topics that we covered. There's facilities that handle all the rehabbing, and I cooperate and try and get birds up there if I ever get calls or something. The rehabbing was just, I can't do everything. And that's, the rehabbing is way more draining than I think the research, because you got a baby, it's like working on a farm. You can't leave. Get someone to do the chores every day. Marge gets in so many birds, eagles, and birds that are got into some lead poisoning. Eagles are frequently getting, and raptors in general, they're eating gut piles from the deer that the guys shoot. And when a bullet goes through the deer and hits a bone, it fragments. And raptors in general have very strong digestive juices in their system. So, because they can dissolve some bones, and so when they eat part of a bullet, whereas humans could get and can, it's a risk. If you eat a deer or venison that was shot by a hunter with a bullet, there is some risk that you could get some lead poisoning. But I think it's not nearly as dangerous or risky for humans because we don't have the strong juices to digest those little BBs, or not BBs, but they can just even be fragments. So that's why it's the eagles are more susceptible to lead poisoning, and it's that's the main push from these agencies or these organizations for pushing for lead-free bullets.
Where are you located?
4 miles west of town. We operate off of Highway 66 West. We operate right out of a section of our house, and we're most of the time, I'd say in the fall is when we're doing programs every night. The rest of we're not like a facility that, it's part of our house, so we don't really like have open hours where people can just come in, although sometimes some people do. Is this the place where you ban birds? You will understand why Sassy got her name. But she's really pretty good. But she's just trying to show off. Yeah. Did she do this for me?
Find in the back, is that all right?
Yeah, if you wait, maybe maybe we should just put her away. When you're done. She gets a little scared. The Saw-whet's not at all afraid of, well, I should say not at all, but she doesn't show a lot of concern for humans. But when they see a barred owl, or they know that those are their enemies, they fear them way more than us. So us handling them, they just are pretty nice. But boy, when the barred owl's around, she would go into a cryptic posture. She would squirm up like this and squint her eyes and try and look like a broken off branch. Now she can't do it nearly as good as a screech owl can, but she does her best job at it. But it's really funny to see a screech owl do it. You see them roosting that way when you get close to them, they'll do that. Or long-eared owls. And I've seen the great horned owl do that when I had her out to catch the red-shouldered hawk. I was surprised. I was watching the owl. She gets stiff and she starts stretching. She didn't go into the full-blown cryptic posture, but she was going into it. She didn't want that red shoulder to detect her because she didn't want to get a dive bomb in her. Because the red shoulder will come swooping over at him, and he's bigger, and she doesn't want to take any guff from that guy. Even though he's only crow-sized, he's not very big, but she's... So did anyone have any other questions about the Saw-whet? Yeah.
Not about the Saw-whet. I wanted to know how many years has your raptor been in Guardian Angel Cemetery?
The Merlin, it's been there during the winter months. Frequently, it's been picked up during the Christmas counts over the years. But as a nesting bird, that was the first year we detected it there.
What, 2 years ago?
No, this year.
Oh, this year.
2013.
Okay, that's my territory for my bluebird route with my 42 boxes.
Yeah.
And I noticed this year that all of a sudden my birds disappeared. So I was wondering, I
remember going through there. I think it was the Cooper's hawk who was bothering the bluebirds.
Well, they took out two house sparrows too, and I was happy about that. So.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Yeah.
If you wanted to put up an owl nest box for saw-whet owls, how high and where would you put it?
I would, I would concentrate putting it in a wooded area that's dominated or has at least a good substantial amount of conifers. So some pine or spruce trees, and not those great big ones that I was climbing. Those the saw-whets really don't care for. That's way too big. So something that's half grown, like 15 or 25 feet tall, something like that range. And so I'd put it in there, and in mostly wooded areas, and it could be wet areas. You could have a wooded, like a stream nearby or a swampy woods, but that doesn't necessarily have to be. But and height, I would say I would have it probably 15 feet, not very high. You could put up a ladder and put it up. Could it even be? I found nests only 5 feet off the ground, but they're. I think most of the time they put them up about 10 feet, 10 or 15 feet.
And then what's the best way to be watching for them?
They usually lay eggs in late March and early April. And so I would say April 15th to May 1st, you could go by, and if you wanted to check if they're home, just go knock on the trunk of the tree, and if she's home, she'll come and poke her head out. She'll stay in there, but you just come and look, who's there? Because she's worried it's a raccoon. And if it's a raccoon, she's getting out of there because she's just going to get killed. She's locked. If he comes up there and reaches in, she's stuck in there. So she'll leave. But when you go up there, just even scratching on the bark of the tree, she usually comes to the hole. Or tap a little bit. But they're hard to sometimes to catch them. Will sometimes walk up there very quietly and then block the hole, and then we can reach in and catch her and band her and band the chicks and put her back in. But she's usually pretty sharp to that. She hears you walking in the grass and she comes to the hole, and then she'll stay there when you're there. But if you're trying to put something over the hole, she sees that and then she'll take off.
They don't peck at you?
Yeah, they do. Most of the raptors, we don't really, well, not most of them. The biting part is not the big thing. It's their talons. They have, the talons are so sharp and there's so much strength that they can really sink them in, and you have a very hard time getting them out. Anything bigger than a kestrel or a saw-whet owl, we're very cautious. We don't wear gloves. I mean, we wear the gloves with the education birds because they perch on our hand. But when we take the eagles out of nets, we don't wear gloves. We have to, and that's part of the class, I teach them how to approach the bird so they do not get footed, and certain maneuvers and certain methods we can do to block their vision, and they can't see. If you put a towel or put your cap over their head, then they can't see, and you can reach down and grab them. We grab them by the legs, so they can't reach us. But they can still reach down and bite us, like the snowy owl. Owls like to bite a little more. Most of the hawks don't bite. That's good. We got ready for the big one?
You could choose where to put a nest box. Nest box. The saw-whet owls like to live in holes. It was the other one, I think it was the red one. But the one that was correct.
She's another education bird. She was, again, hit by a car. Well, we don't know for sure. She just came in, so a veterinarian in Eau Claire, or La Crosse had it, and they had a cast on her foot. It was only supposed to be on her leg for 2 to 3 weeks, and it was 2 to 3 months. So it's stiff. See how her left wing droops? But she can, I mean, she flies when she's in her mew, her cage. She can fly around in there, but it's hard to tell. Yeah, she could fly maybe across the room, but can she fly across a 40? So she would not make it in the wild. She'd probably starve in a few weeks.
So she's used to being handled.
Yeah, pretty much. See, we just got her last June. It's the saw we had for 3 months, or 3 years, but this one we only had for a kind of relatively short time.
What is she doing that her throat is moving?
She's a little hot. She's used to the 20 below we had outside.
Yeah.
So that's how they regulate their temperature, like a dog panting. It's called a guller flutter. That's her, she's fluttering.
She's not pecking.
No, she doesn't usually try and bite me. But she
Notice you said usually.
right, you always have to protect your statements.
Oh, yeah.
What does she weigh?
She weighs about 4 pounds. It gets heavy on your hand pretty fast.
What about an adult snowy?
They usually, for maximum or average size, the snowy is slightly larger in mass. It's heavier. This is a female. But she's not a big female. She's an average to smaller female. Pretty agates, and then you throw. We do feed her mice. She eats it. It takes quite a few. We feed her 150 to 200 grams of food. That's a half a pound, about a little less than a half a pound of meat. So to get a half a pound of mice, it goes through a lot of mice. So I save the mice for Crash, the Saw-whet. Usually she gets, if we find squirrels or rabbits, sometimes roadkills, and then venison too. We have some venison meat. We supplement her diet with venison.
Meat.
Yes, always meat.
So you go around looking for roadkill, or you have people donate, or you raise rats or mice for this purpose, or?
I don't do any raising of any of the
Had a bowl
animals.
this morning.
It's a little, another concern with feeding these birds, these, like you say, roadkill, or probably more is when people have them inside their house and they have a trap set, or in their garage or sheds, is potential chemical or contaminants in the rat poison and mouse poison. So if you live where there's other people living nearby, especially in subdivisions where there's houses are kind of close, that you maybe aren't poisoning the mice in your house, but maybe the guy at door or behind, and the mice will sometimes travel, and then all of a sudden we could be feeding our birds poisoned rats or mice. So years ago, rehab centers and places who had education birds used to be able to get rats and mice from the universities who were doing genetic studies. And they'd do this thing and they'd breed all these hundreds and thousands of mice, and then they'd do genetics on them and they'd put them down. Well, then those centers could get all that free food. Well, now, about 10 years ago, they thought, hey, we could make some extra money and sell them to these places. And so they were getting a buck something a mouse and $2 a rat or something. So if she would, if I buy food for her, and we try and get some, when we get the owl programs, we try and get a donation from, sometimes people can adopt Sassy. And if they give a $40 or $50 donation, then that'll kind of house and maintain her food supply if we have to buy some, which we may have to. So it's kind of a fundraiser thing we use to generate funds to kind of care for her.
Those of us who live at the end of the road and trap mice, we should just throw them in a bag in the freezer for you, right?
Yeah, if we,
There's no chemicals.
yep, if we can be completely, confident that it's, and if it's, I would say it probably should be, the nearest neighbor for mice to be, maybe I'm a little extreme or ultra conservative, that I don't want to have any risk, but probably an eighth of a mile from a house, another neighbor. And the bigger if you're going to catch squirrels, well, squirrels range further than mice, and chipmunks probably less than the squirrels. So
Well, we raise squirrels, we don't kill squirrels.
Oh, okay. So I think Jerry, you could walk down part on the side maybe. Get close. She sits pretty good. Sometimes she thinks she's going to try and fly. And the raptors like it better when there isn't someone behind them. At least on one side, where they have a shelter zone. Maybe, Jerry, you could just turn sideways, and then you don't want them to,
There you go.
she might bomb on somebody if you carry it over someone's head. Yeah.
In the workshops that you give, do you have a minimum age for the students?
I would say the youngest one we had was 16. And there's not material in there that people that age can't handle. So I would say they're long days. They're usually 10 and 12, but they're not physically. That's not hard for them. But I don't know.
Focus.
Yeah, if they can really hang in there that long. And some of it is kind of strenuous, not strenuous physically too much, but exhausting just because the day is long. That kind of endurance. The climbing and the rappelling, those parts of the class are optional. If people aren't comfortable, and I don't, they don't require that people have to carry or handle the bird or do things. But that's the kind of a big part of it, and that's why they would take it. Otherwise, they would probably not take the class, because that's the main benefit would be. Because so many places that a lot of these intern jobs working in the field, they want people who have experience working with mist nets, extracting birds, and it doesn't. You can't just kind of have someone show you, and in 5 minutes, oh, I got the hang of it. It takes a couple hundred birds, really. You can learn to get to a real low level of security confidence after about 50. So when you get 100 birds taken out of the net under your belt, mist nets. These other bull nets, that's not so complicated because he doesn't get tangled. But yeah, mist nets take a lot of experience. And, yeah.
Do the students actually get that many birds in that week-long season?
No, they don't. They get a chance to learn the basics on grips and how to approach the bird, how to handle the bird. But the expertise of learning how to untangle them, I can give them some pointers, and we practice on pigeons before we get to raptors. They got to work their way up a little bit, and they can learn the principles, and then I'm there coaching them the whole time. So each student only takes a couple birds. Saw-whets during the fall, we might catch 100 saw-whets during the workshop, and then you divide that up easily.
Yep, I'll watch that.
So they'll get their hands on several birds, but yeah, they're not. And I tell them not to think that they could be able to handle the intern position unless that's what they're expected as an intern to learn as they go. But if they are going to try and coordinate something or be involved in a mist netting project, don't think that you can put us down and that we'll give you a reference that you can handle it, because we won't be able to. But mist netting part, it takes a lot of time.
How does one get enough of that kind in?
Probably the easiest way, or the best way, is to volunteer with somebody who needs that. Sometimes they have opportunities, volunteer opportunities at some of the banding stations. And sometimes the positions they're temporary position, it's just during the fall migration, and they part of the conditions would train you, and we'll have an experienced bander there with you. You'll be working in a team, and then during the season, you'll take out, 10 or 20 a day, and they'll be there to help you. Once you get started, they kind of maybe give you the easy ones, and after a few days, you got 20 or 30 birds done, and I kind of got the hang of this, and then you can always ask for help. But after 3-4 weeks, then even 2 weeks, if you're going through quite a few birds, you can learn quite a bit. But in the workshop, they're not going to be very good because they only did a few birds. But they do have the basics down, and I coach them right through taking the red tail out of the net. We get to the birds so quick, a lot of times they aren't tangled very much. They're not like a mess. Like they can get in if you're taking a different bird out in a mist netting project, and other birds fly into the net, and while you're taking that one out, and then the other one, you get to that one, it's been in there for 5 minutes, tangled. Yeah.
How many birds do you take care of, like these?
Just
two?
these two.
Just those two?
Yep, just the great horn and the saw-whet.